Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. The Creepy Man by Elizabeth K. My parents started leaving me and my sisters home alone when I was 13 or 14. Of course, the rule was to not let anyone know we were alone and to not let anyone in the house. One night there was a knock at the door, so I went to it and tried to look out, but I couldn't see anyone. My sister and I couldn't pretend we weren't there because the lights and TV were on. I opened the front door a crack, thinking that the person would be behind the screen door, but that wasn't the case. There was a man in his late 20s or early 30s standing in the doorway. I shut the door quickly and told him to get behind the screen door. He obliged me, and I cracked the door. Yeah, I wasn't very smart. And I latched the screen door. He told me a story about his vehicle breaking down and his need to use a phone. When I told him that I couldn't see a car, he indicated that it was further down the road, and I asked why he walked past the two houses right next door to me, the one with no car in the driveway, and he became agitated. Here's a general recollection of the conversation. Him. Look, are you going to let me use the phone or not? Me. No, my dad's sleeping, and I can't let you go into his room to use the phone. Okay, bring the phone out here and I'll use it. I'm not letting you in this house. Just bring the phone to the door. It won't reach. Please leave. Then he said okay. I shut the door and I locked it. While my sister and I were talking about how scary that was, we heard the side door handle jiggling. We looked up in the window, and he was standing there knocking, saying, "Will the phone reach this door?" At that point, I told him to go to the neighbor's house and use their phone. And he started yelling, "I bet your dad's not there. I bet your dad's not there. Let me in." I just said, "Fine, I'll go get my dad." And then I went into my dad's room and got his shotgun. I came out, racked it, and said, "Here, meet my dad." The guy started cursing and calling me names, but he left. Or at least that's what I thought. He had actually gone around to another door of our house and tried to get in that door. But our dog, who was outside at the time, began barking at him. We didn't see what it was, but he proceeded to do something that made my dog yelp and cry out, and I screamed that I was calling the police. Now he finally left. I felt really stupid for that entire interaction. I don't know if he was just a guy who really needed a phone, but the whole experience was creepy, and I was obviously ill-prepared for dealing with it. They Weren't from the Police by HMU Bro. This story pops back up in my mind from time to time. I've only told it to a few people. It's for sure one of the scariest moments I've ever had as a child. Back when I was around 10 years old, my mom finally decided that it was time for her to get her driver's license. When she began taking lessons, she was struggling a lot. And for that reason, my dad decided that he wanted to do some practice with her besides the official driving lessons with her instructor, just to make sure she'd pass the upcoming test first try. My brother and I were attending swimming lessons at this nearby university at the time. Behind a forested area near the university was this huge parking lot area surrounded by trees which turned out to be basically empty every weekend. My dad saw the opportunity to take my mom there to drive around for a bit, and brought my little brother and I with them since we were too young to stay home alone. We brought a football with us. When we arrived at the parking lot later on in the evening, my parents began their practice. My little brother and I quickly got bored, though, and asked if we could go over to this little grass field on the side of the parking lot to play some football. My parents let us since they'd always be able to keep their eyes on us whilst driving around. And after playing for some time, my parents ended up driving around on the other end of the parking lot. They were maybe 300 or 400 meters away from my brother and I. Suddenly, this white Toyota pulled into the parking lot. We were playing almost right at the exit or the entrance of the parking lot, and the car turned around and stopped on my right side with the vehicle facing the exit. The driver rolled down his windows and presented himself as Thomas. He looked friendly, was good-looking and young, I guess maybe around 30. But this is where things started to get weird. On the passenger seat was a woman covering her face with a newspaper. All I could see was long blonde hair. And in the back seat, a baby sat in a baby chair. Thomas immediately stated that he was from the police, and that we'd have to get in the car immediately as he had to talk to us. My brother actually took 2 steps towards the vehicle, but I stuck my arm in front of his chest as I was sensing something was off. The woman was still covering her face at this point, not saying a word. Thomas then raised his voice and told us once again to get in the car or else he'd have to come out and get us. My brother and I froze out of fear. And suddenly the woman put down the newspaper, showed her face, and told us in the most calm, motherly voice to just listen to the man. The woman looked young, pretty, and like a person who wouldn't hurt a fly. At that moment I began to scream as loud as I could. What we hadn't seen at that point was that my dad was already running as fast as he could towards us. He was coming from behind the vehicle, so we didn't see it. My parents didn't have the time to drive to us since the road down to the parking lot was twisted all over the way. When my dad heard me scream, he started yelling as loud as he could, "Hey, who the F are you? Get the F away from my children!" As soon as Thomas heard my dad and realized my brother and I weren't alone, he threw his car into gear and took off as fast as he could. He most definitely looked like a person who shat himself when he saw my dad. My dad was furious and told my brother and I to hurry up back to the car. He didn't even think about calling the police at that point. He wanted to beat up the guy himself. That resulted in us driving around for the next hour trying to find him before my dad cooled down and decided that he should probably just call the police. We never found out who those people were, but this episode taught me never judge a book by its cover. People can be the most friendly-looking people in the world and still wish evil upon you or the ones you love. I'm not sure what those people would have done to us, but I am sure about one thing. They definitely weren't from the police. Babysitting by Tabitha B. The names used in this are fake for privacy reasons. When I was a senior in high school, I began babysitting for a single mother. Angela. She had 2 kids, Lauren, age 12, and Ryan, age 7. Angela had recently divorced from her husband, and I started babysitting for their family before the separation, so I had a sideline view of the messy situation. It was very nasty. The parents were not great to each other. After the divorce was finalized, Angela came into a good deal of money and ended up buying a 2-story, white brick old house in the historic neighborhood of my town. Now, when I say the house was old, it was old. The type of old that carries a smell with it. The type you can hear in every floorboard. The type that carries so much history you can't help but feel like memories are seeping out of the walls. The type of old that is pleasant during the day, magical even, but at night seems foreign and scary, like you're just a guest passing through a structure that will remain long after you have left. Okay, saying all that, the house was old and at night really showed its age. I mean, everything creaked. To make matters worse, the house was the opposite of open concept. Every room was sectioned off by walls and doors. So when I was watching the kids one Friday night, which was my normal night with them, Angela always said she had dinner plans with friends, but I knew she was going to a bar and getting plastered, because she would always come home, leave money on the dining room table, yell thank you in a slurred voice, and finally proceed up the incredibly squeaky stairs, all without coming into contact with me, an underage girl. It was around 9 p.m. this night, and I had just gotten the kids to bed. They each had their own bedrooms, but slept in Ryan's room, bunk beds, because he hated sleeping alone. He always had nightmares. Usually, Lauren would stay awake and play on her tablet a little while before falling asleep, but Ryan usually passed out pretty quickly once I could get him to finally stop getting up for water or to go to pee or whatever. It literally took 20 to 30 minutes to get him to bed. So, around 9, I was downstairs alone in the den. The actual living room didn't have a TV and was more of a sitting room. The den, of course, was closed off, and it had its own door. The only way in or out was that door, which I left open so I could listen upstairs if the kids needed me or were sneaking out of bed. As I was sitting on the couch flipping through the channels trying to find something to watch on TV to keep me occupied for the next couple hours, I heard a very light knock on the front door. I could see the front door from where I was sitting because it was a straight shot from the den to the couch. It was back far enough that all I had to do was lean my head back. I should note here that the only lights on in the house were the upstairs hall light, the den lights, and a small lamp in the kitchen. The only light that allowed me to see the front door is what was cast down the staircase. The front door did have 2 slender windows on either side of them, but they had curtains that were drawn, so apart from the solid door and 2 closed curtained windows, I couldn't see outside on the front porch. Maybe it was because the house was so old and I was used to hearing it creak all the time, or because I'm a lock freak and keep all entrances, windows included, to any place I'm staying, that includes my own home, locked tight. I had seen way too many horror movies to ever forget to lock a door. So I didn't go and peek out at any of the windows. I simply decided to ignore it, even though it definitely started my adrenaline going. So I continued flipping through the channels, at that point not really paying attention to the TV anymore. Maybe a minute passed and I heard the knock again, but this time a little louder. Loud enough that I couldn't pass it off as a house creak, but quiet enough that it wouldn't wake up the kids. At that point I had no choice but to get up off the couch and peek out one of the windows. Trying to be sneaky, I crouched down and looked out the window from really low. That way if someone was watching the curtains, they wouldn't see me. But when I drew back the curtains, no one was there. The only thing I saw was an empty street illuminated by those classic street lamps, and a very dark front yard. I'm not going to lie, I was pretty freaked out. I was a high school senior babysitting 2 kids asleep in bed in a large old house that already gave me the creeps on its own. I was in the setting for the most perfect horror movie, having too much adrenaline to go back and try to watch TV, but not feeling threatened enough to call Angela or the cops. I opted for sitting on the bottom step of the staircase, right in front of the door, and just playing on my phone, checking on the front door lock before going to sit down just in case. I kid you not, maybe 10 seconds after I had sat down, I heard the knock again. This time, instead of being sneaky, I simply peeked out the curtain at eye level, just in time to see someone run behind one of the trees in the front yard. Let me tell you, I actually let out a sigh of relief. Where I grew up in that town, ding-dong ditch was a staple for teenagers, and I could handle harmless teenager pranks. Usually, to get the ditchers to stop, you turn on your front porch light, so that's what I did. I even laughed a little as I walked back to the couch. I should have reasoned it was just a prank from the beginning, but as my butt hit the couch, I heard yet another knock, but this time it was even louder than the last 2. Now my anxiety had turned to annoyance. I had 2 sleeping kids upstairs, and if the knocking persisted, it would wake them up, leaving me to the task of getting them back to bed. So up from the couch I went. I pulled one of the curtains back, revealing an empty lit front porch, and I began to flick the porch light on and off, maybe 5 or 6 times, leaving the light on after I was done. But instead of going back to the couch, I stood there and waited with the curtain open, daring any teenager to try knocking on the door one more time. After a few minutes, I felt confident that I'd finally gotten to them to leave, so I turned the porch light off, closed the curtains, and headed back to the den. 5 minutes later, the loudest knocking I had ever heard came. It sounded like someone was honestly trying to break the door down. At that point, I don't know if I was feeling more anger or fear. I rushed to the front door, pulled back the curtain, flipped on the light, and came face to face with a person wearing a full-on bunny rabbit costume. Think the Easter Bunny, but the costume looked 50 years old and was incredibly dirty. For maybe 10 seconds, I just stood there in utter shock. A creepy bunny costume was the last thing I expected to see. A teenager laughing his head off? Sure. An escaped convict wielding a knife? Maybe. A dirty old bunny rabbit costume? Not a chance. The creepiest part was they were standing completely still, just staring straight ahead at the front door, until they slowly turned their masked head and looked directly at me. That's when I noticed that the mesh eyes that are usually on costumes like this to allow the person inside some vision had been completely cut out. So I was actually looking right into the eyes of the person who was hiding inside. And that's what triggered my fight or flight. Not because there was a creepy rabbit stranger on the front porch, but because those eyes looked so empty. It felt like they were going to swallow me up if I stared at them too long. I jumped back from the window, pulled my cell phone from my back pocket, and dialed 911, still keeping my eyes on the bunny man, but further away from the window. 911, please state your emergency. There's a man on my porch in a creepy bunny costume, and he's been knocking on the door for a little over 10 minutes. Okay, ma'am. Is he still on the porch? Yes, he's staring at me through the window. Can you send someone over here fast, please? I'm babysitting 2 kids. All right, give me your name and address. We'll get someone en route. I gave the name and address. How fast can they be here? Something is really off. We have officers in a nearby area. They should be there shortly. Just stay on the phone with me until they arrive, okay? Okay. Before either of us had a chance to say anything else, I felt a tug on my shirt, which almost made me shit my pants. I'd been so focused on the phone call and keeping an eye on the bunny man, I didn't hear the kids come downstairs. When I spun around to look at them, the kids peered around me and saw the bunny man, and both promptly let out blood-curdling screams. That triggered the bunny man, who began banging wildly on the front door again. With each wail on the front door, I swear the house creaked in accordance. At the sight of his raging on the front door and 2 terrified kids, I kept the phone in my hand but pulled it away from my ear and wrapped the 2 kids in my arms before quickly rushing them into the den and closing the door behind us. Even through the closed den door, we could still hear the banging, and Lauren and Ryan were both crying at this point, refusing to let go of my waist. Will someone get here soon? He's banging on the door again, and the kids are awake and scared shitless. I was scared out of my mind at that point, so cussing in front of the kids wasn't something I cared about at that moment. They're only a few minutes out. Can you and the children try to find a safe place to hide? We're in the den with the door locked, but there really isn't a place to hide in here. Okay. Keep the door locked and sit tight. Officers will be there soon. Can you still hear him outside? Yes, it's really loud. I'm scared he's going to break the door down. Okay, officers are a minute out. Can you describe the costume the person is wearing? He's in a white old bunny-looking costume. It looks really dirty and the eyes are cut out. Are you sure this is a male? And before I could respond, the banging stopped. The banging stopped? Yes, it's quiet. Okay, just stay where you are. Officers are in your neighborhood. Yeah, like we were going to move from our spot. Ma'am, officers have arrived at the scene. Do not exit the room you are in until police announce themselves. Do you want me to unlock the front door for them? Please don't let them kick it down. This isn't my house. Ma'am, officers say the front door was wide open upon arrival. Just stay where you are. Officers will get to you shortly. But the door was locked. I always keep the doors locked. To wrap up this very long story, somehow when police arrived, the front door was wide open, even though I knew it was locked, and had even checked after that second time the bunny man knocked. The bunny man was nowhere to be seen. The police did a search of the house, which was all clear. There was no one outside except the 3 of us. They didn't find him around outside of the house either. They said they would canvass the neighborhood, but I'm not sure if anything ever came of it. They did leave an officer to wait outside the house until Angela got home, and I called her as soon as the police got us from that room and was able to get off the phone with 911. I think they could all see how shaken I was. For a long time after that night, I refused to babysit for anyone, maybe a solid year. And when I did start babysitting again, it was really easy money. By the time I started again, I was in college and needed the extra cash. I would jump any time I heard anything outside after dark. To this day, I don't know if they ever found the Bunny Man. That sounds stupid, but I don't know what else to call him. And I don't know what his intentions were. Maybe it was just to scare the shit out of random people. Or maybe it was something worse. But either way, that was by far the creepiest thing to ever happen to me, while babysitting, or ever. Lost Time on the Bear River, submitted by Utah. I thought I would tell you about the night I spent on the Bear River in Weber County in Utah. For those of you interested, I'm north of Skinwalker Ranch, about an hour and a half. Skinwalker is located maybe an hour south of Salt Lake City to the east in Ballard County. On this particular night, my mom was watching our 3 younger children. We were just planning on going out to run the last of the gas so engine work could be done the next day on our boat. So that meant we had less than a quarter of a tank. We told my mom we'd be back around 9 or 10. It was 6:30 p.m. It was summertime, so the sun wasn't quite going down as we left our home in Davis County. We headed 20 minutes north on I-15, and we were only planning on being gone for maybe an hour or 2 tops. We got out onto the river and unloaded the boat on the dock around sunset. I got as comfortable as you can get on those hard wooden slats that make up the seating in an old fishing boat. I hate fishing. I hate the fishing boat. However, my husband loves it, and because he loves it, I find every device I can possibly take to find with me, along with a lot of pillows and blankets, so I can entertain myself as he fishes. That night I had a brand new Nikon camera with me. I was going to figure out how to use it while we were out on the river. I had my iPhone, I had my laptop, and an extra charging battery, too. That night in particular, there was also a lot going on at home, as my grandma was getting ready to die out in California, and I was kind of waiting for that phone call. My husband had his phone fully charged as well. He went to his first fishing spot that he always goes to and started fishing. I took a couple of pictures with my new camera, downloaded them, and posted them on Instagram. I had a device on my new camera which connected my iPhone to my camera, making my picture available immediately on my phone. However, upon going to check Instagram after posting my picture, my phone was dead. It had just been completely charged, and now it was dead. I was like, well, that's okay. I still have my laptop, so I logged onto my laptop, and I got on it and checked my battery. It was dead too. I looked at my brand new Nikon camera, and no way. The Nikon was dead. So I told my husband that my phone was dead, my laptop was dead, and now my camera was dead. I asked him if I could use his phone so that I could call home and let everybody know that my phone happened to be dead and to call my husband's phone. He just rolled his eyes because he's thinking, of course, I've killed it already, but he didn't understand the way electronics work at all. Meaning he doesn't know how weird it was that within 15 minutes of being on the river, all of my devices were dead. So now we had an issue. We had another hour to go at least, doing exactly what? I didn't know. I remembered I pulled out some paper and I wrote some journal entries about life. I've kept a journal since I was 12, so I figured I'll just write for a little bit. I looked up, and it was really dark. I said, "Honey, it's getting late, and we've been out here for a while. Let's just get ready to go." Both of us thought it was around 9 o'clock at that time, and he said there was one last hole he wanted to hit up, and then we could go. We ran around a curve at the southern end of the Bear River up to the more northern part of the Bear. He casted his line at that time, and I started hearing, and don't laugh, what sounded like mechanical mooing cows. I'm not kidding. I said to my husband, "Do you hear that?" And being a farm boy, I figured he would know what it was. And I said, "It sounds like mechanical cows." And he said, "It's probably just a loon." And I said, "Wait, what's a loon? Like a lunatic?" And he said, "No, babe, a bird. The loon. It sounds like it's sick birds. Listen, they're all around us." I would find out later he didn't have a clue what those sounds were. He was just saying anything to shut me up. He fished for a little bit longer, and I was attempting to triangulate the location of where I was hearing each sound on paper. It seemed like all of the sounds were trying to communicate. So this mechanical mooing continued for another 10 minutes, upon which my husband decided it was time to go home. I asked him what time he thought it was, and he said, "I don't know, 9:30. And I said, "Okay, good. Mom has to work at 5 in the morning. I knew that she had to be in the operating room exactly at 5, and it was important that she wouldn't be late." We docked the boat, and immediately I felt creeped out, and I don't even know why. I didn't even want to get off the fishing boat. It's hard to explain the topography, but you have to remember that Utah is a desert state. So just imagine 5-foot-tall weeds all over and a little bit of dirt, and somebody's makeshift dock. That's where we were. There was maybe 25 or 30 feet between where we parked the boat and where those 5-foot-tall weeds began. I got out of the boat, again creeped out. I asked my husband again what time he thought it was. I was just worried that we weren't going to be back in time for my mom to get enough sleep before she had to get up at 4. We did have 3 small children, and I was sure they were keeping her occupied. I got into the truck and I turned it on. I looked at the clock, and it said 5:58. I yelled out of the driver's side door, "Hey, babe, do you know what time it is?" He was preoccupied trying to get things unloaded that needed to be in his truck. So he was busy, and he didn't care what time it was, and he said, "No, probably around 10. I said, "Try again. The truck says it's 5:58 a.m. Of course, my husband, the no-nonsense farm boy, yelled back, "You probably fucked it up playing around with the radio on our way here. Just plug your phone in, charge it, and while you're at it, come and help me get some of the stuff out of the boat." Okay, I did not want to get out of the truck, but I did get out to help him and get the boat back on the trailer. And then I got back in the truck because, again, I was having this creepy feeling. I can't tell you whether or not I heard the mechanical cows, but I didn't think I could hear them anymore. Once I was in the passenger side of the truck and my husband was still making sure everything was strapped down good, I turned my phone on and saw that it read 6 a.m. My stomach dropped. That would make my mom an hour late for work. But weirder still, the whole night was gone. I mean, there's no way we could have spent 8 hours out on the river. To be out there overnight? There's no way. I would be covered in mosquito bites. Needless to say, at that time there was nothing my husband could say. I mean, he didn't know what happened and left it to the unexplainable to this day. But upon returning home was a whole different story. Our kids have to be at school, and we both had to be at work at 9. Again, this was supposed to just be 2 hours, which is exactly what it felt like last night. 2 hours. It had been 8. And when I walked in my mom's house, all 3 of my kids were crying, including my mom. The first thing she said was, 10 more minutes and I was going to call the search and rescue. We ended up getting the kids to school, and we both got to work. I wasn't very tired. I didn't feel like I'd been up all night. That's how it ended. Somehow, we lost 8 hours, and we don't know how. There is one small detail. I always wear a hat to work. I have long hair, so I have to wear a ponytail, and I just put on a baseball cap. That morning when I went to put my hand to my ear hurt. I looked in the truck rearview mirror, and I saw that I've got these 2, maybe 3 centimeter by 1 centimeter like looking burns on the very tops of my ears. but the front part that you can see that was the top of my ear, you'd have to be above me to see. That's it. The Bear River stole 8 hours from us, and we heard mechanical cows out there. Yeah, that happened. Something in My Mother's Flat by Marcangelo 99. You might not believe what happened to me. It's still playing on my mind, and I can't make any sense of it. I visit my mom every few months since I live abroad. I live in Paris, and she's in Belgium. We have this cheesy tradition where she waves at me from her window every time I head out, even for a couple of hours. We've been doing this for 17 years since she moved there when I was 14. However, this last visit took a strange turn. As usual, after saying goodbye, I walk to the bus stop. There's a path from her street leading to the bus shelter. Turning around for the familiar wave, I saw her at the window. She smiled and waved, and I could clearly see her smile. She was holding the curtain with one hand and waving with the other. So I waved back, and she smiled and waved again. Our usual little moment. But then she texted me. She said she hadn't seen me leave on the street and was wondering if I reached the bus stop. She told me that she went to the window to say goodbye, but I was gone already. I am certain of what I saw, and there was no way anyone else was in her apartment. My mom lives alone and never entertains. And also, I was in the flat 2 minutes before. It was just her and I. Her place is on the 3rd floor, and while details are hard to catch from the ground, the gestures and her smile were unmistakable. But my mom insisted she wasn't at the window when I was out there, and definitely didn't wave at me. I believe her. It's also worth noting that what prevented her from going to the window to check on me was that she heard me speaking with a neighbor in the staircase. So she opened the door to remind me the bus was scheduled for only a couple of minutes later. There was no one else in the staircase, and I didn't meet any neighbor while going out. I've encountered my fair share of the unexplainable, and this has only deepened my curiosity. There's no logical explanation for someone else being in her apartment or entering unnoticed. So, what or who did I see? Is there an explanation? I was feeling great yesterday. I didn't drink or take any drugs either. I'm looking to you guys. I need your theories, insights, or if you've had similar experiences. What do you think was happening at my mom's window? Someone Outside, submitted by Tom L. The first time my parents let me and my brother stay home alone, I was 13 and he was 11. This was in the mid-80s. My parents were going out to some dance or something, and we were provided with TV dinners. Those brownies ruled, man. And given instructions. Don't let anyone inside the house we didn't know. Don't let anyone who was calling for my parents asking for them know that they weren't home, and to be in bed by 10. My dad said 11 when my mom left the room. We were all set for an evening of a movie and mixing in some MTV, which my mom hated. I'm not trying to paint my mom in a bad light here. She was and is awesome. She just didn't like all the half-naked women and sexual overtones of MTV. We thought it was great. But we told her we'd be watching King Kong most of the night. Mom and Dad gave us the number of the place they were going to be, but said to only call in an emergency, as it was a hotel and they were going to be having a dinner, hearing some person talk, and then dancing. They were planning on being home by 1 at the latest. If we needed anything, we could call our neighbor, Mr. Reed. My brother, his name is Jared, but I call him Jarhead. We had dinner. My parents drove off, and we locked the front door. Out came our tins of Skol, and yeah, we dipped even that young. We just played Atari for a while, and then we started watching the movie, just excited to be on our own. I thought I'd be a big shot and mix some Kool-Aid with a little vodka, careful not to take too much so my mom wouldn't notice. But my dad didn't drink, but we knew she would notice. And man, I was way ahead of myself. It tasted like crap, and I threw it out. So much for me being a big shot. We flicked between the movie and MTV for a while. And then the front doorbell rang, so I got up to see who it was. We had windows on the sides of the front door, and we'd left the light on, so I peeked out, and a strange man was standing there. He hadn't noticed me looking at him. He rang the bell again, and Jarhead yelled out, "Hey, who's there, Tom?" I wanted to kill him. The guy sort of tilted his head closer to the door like he was listening for the sounds of us inside. I didn't open the door, and after a minute or two he stepped back, making a sound. He walked away. I ran back to the living room and socked Jarhead in the arm for yelling out, and he immediately swung back. We wrestled for a minute, and then we heard a knock at our back door. We stopped. Only our friends or family ever came to the back door. "Maybe it's Mr. Reed," said Jarhead, but I told him it wasn't our neighbor. The back door led directly into our kitchen, and we couldn't see it from where we were while we were wrestling on the floor. But we heard the handle jiggling like someone was trying to open the door. We didn't move, we just held our breath. "Should we call Mr. Reed?" my brother whispered. "No," I said. "Let's just wait for this guy to go away." After a few minutes, I got up and crept over to the door and looked out, and I didn't see anyone in our yard. "This is messed up," Jarhead said, and I nodded. Who could that person be? We went back to the living room and the phone rang. When I answered it, there was no voice there, but some heavy breathing. When I said hello again, and then hello for a third time, there was this creepy laugh and the phone hung up. Jarhead asked me who it was, and I said, "I don't know, wrong number. Some dickhead doesn't know how to dial." We tried to calm down and went back to the MTV, but a while later the phone rang again, and the same thing happened. The second call was unnerving, and Jarhead said, "Hey, let's take the Atari to our room and turn the lights off out here." To this day, I don't know why that sounded like a good idea, but that's what we did. We grabbed our spit cups, the Atari, and went to our room. We lived in a ranch, and all the bedrooms were on the ground level. After I hooked the Atari up to our little black and white TV, Jarhead went down the hall to go to the bathroom. He was gone a long while, and I went looking for him. He was out there on the ground looking around the corner of the hallway into our dining room. "I just saw someone standing outside the window," he whispered. I didn't bother to ask him who it was. But then we heard a noise from behind us. It was kind of a cracking sound. We snuck back to our room where the TV was still on, and I looked around. Then we heard a scratching noise coming from our window. The curtains were down on it, but the scratching kept coming. I quietly went to the window and then threw the curtains up and immediately yelled. There was a guy standing right there with his hands up on the window. The look in his eyes was not a good one, but that's all I could see because he had this clear mask on his face, just sort of blurred everything out. I yelled again and jumped backwards into Jarhead, knocking him over. Without checking on him, I ran to the phone and dialed our neighbor, Mr. Reed, and tried to tell him that someone was outside trying to get in. I'm sure it was all just a jumble of stupid kid words, but he just said hold on and that he was coming over. I said I was going back to our room, but Jared screamed to not leave him alone. Pretty soon we heard some shouting outside, so we ran back to the living room and looked out the window. A dark shape was running across our lawn, and it jumped into a white van that was parked out front. I saw Mr. Reed running after the guy, but after the van started up, it just peeled out and sped down the street. Mr. Reed came running to the front door and we let him in. We told him everything, and he told us to try to calm down and asked where my parents were. We all sat in the living room as he called them at the hotel and finally got my dad on the phone. By now it was around 11:30, and my dad said that he was on his way. My parents got home and were glad we were okay, and then they called the cops. Mr. Reed stuck around to talk to them, and they went all around the house checking on things. What they found was creepy. Outside our bedroom window, there was a BB gun and an ice pick. They also found a pair of gloves in the front yard that weren't our family's. We later learned what the sounds we had heard were. This strange man had shot a BB just through the window lock in our room. He'd made a hole big enough for the ice pick to come through, and he was trying to push open the lock for the window. That's when I must have found him, when I heard him scratching at the window. That's when Mr. Reed had come out. He saw the guy at the window, and then chased him out to his creepy van. The night ended with everyone safe, but my mom was still freaking out. We had no idea who the man was, how he knew we were home alone, and no idea what he was planning on doing had he got into the house. Obviously, I'm much older now, but I'll never forget that night. But I still wonder where that guy came from, and much worse, where he went when he took off. I like to think that we were the only house he's ever visited, but in this screwed up world, I know in my heart that's not true. I can only hope no other kids ever got hurt by that freak. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like to hear narrated on my channel or podcast, email it to unclejosh.truescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. Please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Share it with your friends. Leave a comment below. I will get back to you as soon as I can. And of course, if you'd like to follow me on social media, links to that are in the description. If you'd like to take your support even further, a link to my Patreon page is there in the description as well. And you can find me on tpublic.com. Get yourself some Uncle Josh and Campfire Crew merchandise. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.